The purpose of my video here is to introduce myself in a little more depth, and also in hopes that you in turn will give me comments or information about yourselves so that I can get to know who you are as well. So again, my name is John, and I am 72 years old, and I trained early on in the field of clinical psychology, which I worked at for probably 40 years before retiring in 2008. I have the good fortune to be retired, and my mantra, so to speak, is every day is a gift. So I have the luxury of freedom, and I'm able to spend time focused on my love of the Buddha, Dharma, in order to provide these recitation uploads to YouTube. So again, being 72, I date my participation and involvement and commitment to Buddhism back to 1979, this being now 2020. So I was about 30 years old at the time. And what happened was I had kind of a, what I call kind of a spiritual awakening type experience. I was facing a bit of a crisis in my life. And in the context of feeling a sense of helplessness, I suddenly experienced some kind of change in my sort of mental makeup such that I no longer felt the kind of anxiety that I had been plagued with from time to time during my early adulthood years. Now, I didn't really have any religious belief system at the time, even though I was raised in the Episcopal Church within Christianity. Keeping in mind now that I'm in the United States of America. I grew up in Michigan, but I now live in North Carolina, which is part of what's called the Bible Belt in the United States. So this being a very Christian country, that naturally was the approach that I was exposed to early on. But again, at the time of this experience, I didn't really focus on any particular religion. But when this experience happened, I said to myself, what is this about? This is great. And it wasn't just a momentary experience. So anyway, I started to read different religious texts and articles and talk to different people who had experience with religion of various kinds of faith traditions and various kinds of denominations and so forth. But what I discovered over the course of time was that for me, the approach that resonated most deeply and that seemed to fit my best explanation of what was going on with me was Buddhism in general, and Mahayana Buddhism in particular. I had the good fortune at that time in the small town that I lived in to encounter an older woman who also was a Buddhist. She was a Pure Land Buddhist. In fact, she painted images of Amida Buddha coming over the mountain, being prepared to come down to the dying person in order to, permit them to be reborn onto the lotus flower and into the Pure Land. Of course, it's Kuan Yin, Bodhisattva, who's providing that lotus flower within the so-called Rego paintings within Pure Land tradition. And, maybe that was the reason that I also very much got turned on to art. And I'll say more about that later on, but I love Buddhist art, particularly, frankly, Chinese, and especially Chinese paintings. But in any case, Lucille and we studied together the Lotus Sutra. And the Lotus Sutra has continued to be, for me, one of the most meaningful scriptures within the Buddhist canon. Why? Because it emphasizes skillful means or expedient means, or sometimes what are translated as tactful means or tactfulness. In other words, and this is how I think the Buddha operates, is that in Buddhism, there are varieties of Buddhist teachings that can relate to people of different mental kinds of compositions, different types of psychological makeups, different types of cultural frameworks that, again, can help draw people of different orientations into an appreciation of the kind of spiritual path that Buddhism provides for us. In other words, there's not just sort of one narrow belief system that one has to take on faith, and if you don't believe that, then whatever, you're going to hell, or there won't be any opportunity for ultimate fulfillment. And of course, what was appealing too is that ultimate fulfillment in Buddhahood is that, we are told that within Mahayana Buddhism, all of us will become Buddhas. We all have the Buddha nature. What a wonderful, wonderful kind of notion that is. And even though we're plagued by the three poisons of greed and hatred and ignorance, that over the course of time and with exposure to good teachers and to the scriptures, that we can cultivate that Buddha nature to the point where we attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, or perfect enlightenment, similar to what the historical Sakyamuni Buddha experienced in his life. So anyway, I found this to be very appealing. Now, being a householder, not an ordained person, and not somebody who had the freedom to, pursue a monastic kind of career, but rather a person who was raising a family and working at a job during the day, I was limited in the extent to which I could focus on Buddhism, but I did spend a lot of time trying to establish relationships with people who had similar kinds of leanings, particularly in the Pure Land tradition. And I developed some long-distance relationships with people across the United States and frankly, the world, and developed a so-called Wider Shin Buddhist Fellowship. And also, during one period of time, published what I was calling Buddhist Notes from the Boondocks. The Boondocks means a rural area, because I was living, and still am, in a rural area where there are hardly any other Buddhists. I'm near a town called Asheville, North Carolina, and in Asheville there are Buddhist groups, but they are mainly Zen Buddhists and Tibetan Buddhists and Theravada Buddhists. None, as far as I know, are Pure Land Buddhists, which again is the tradition that I related to. Because why? I wanted to highlight for people that there is an easy path, that, for people who can follow the Bodhisattva path, take the Bodhisattva vows, and express themselves with the kind of altruism and rigorous practices that many of the Buddhists within China were able to attain and accomplish on the Tianchai mountain. That's wonderful. That's great. But for many of us, particularly householders, that's not a possible path for us. So again, I felt like I wanted to highlight an easy path that people could follow, which is basically a path of reliance upon Amida Buddha, Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light, Amitayus, the Buddha of infinite life. And of course, that path talks to us about saying the name, which, I think in Chinese is Namu Amitabha, Namu Amitabha, Namu Amitabha. So that's my path, the Pure Land path. And, ultimately I very much studied the approach that Shinran took in Japan, which really refined the Pure Land school up to its final form of a system of pure grace. So I really credit the Chinese when Buddhism came to China, supposedly through Bodhidharma, and then got translated into Chinese by various famous translators, and encountered the Chinese traditions of Taoism and Confucianism, and worked within the heart of the Chinese culture to evolve into a deeper and more profound religion, even beyond the scope of what existed in India, where the Buddha founded the tradition. Now, I have to say, I'm not a scholar. As I said, I'm not ordained in any sense. I'm not an official religious leader of any kind, but I do appreciate the Buddha Dharma, and I appreciate particularly the sutras or scriptures. And as my friend Sean has said, unfortunately, I think in the West, there aren't as many kinds of opportunities to be exposed to the direct teachings within the sutras, the original scriptures. And so that's part of why our project of putting forward some of these things with Chinese and English text screens, we feel is very important. And the fact that they are gaining so many views and positive comments online also certainly speaks to this benefit that they have. But getting back to the idea of art, I want to show a couple of still photographs of the background that exists behind me, which is here in my office. I want to show that one, and I want to show one other view of a particular statue that I have, and I'll describe those. So with that said, I'll shift to a description of a couple of these photos. Thank you very much. Namu Amida Boots. Namu Amida Boots. Namu Amida Boots. So in this photo, you can see the chair that I was sitting in, and of course I was facing toward the camera. But looking at some of the items in this photo from the left, in the very lower left, you can see the statue, I guess you would say, of Fudo Myoho. He's one of the wisdom kings who helps protect Buddhism. I'll just go from left to right just to share a couple of things. Sort of, again, on the left-hand side in the middle, you see a photograph of a small scroll, and that is Shinran Shonin, of course, 13th century Japanese monk who refined Pure Land Buddhism to its ultimate degree of a system of pure grace. And that's, with his hand, a calligraphy of the 6 characters Namu, Amida, Butsu in Chinese. To the right of that is a scroll that is Om Mani Padme Hum. Here in our town, we actually had Tibetan monks come in and create a sand mandala, and you may have read or heard about how they do that. And at the end of the process, they destroy it, which is sort of a message of impermanence. After having spent 3 or 4 days creating this beautiful mandala, but it was at the visits by them that I obtained this particular scroll. Sort of tagged onto that closet door is actually a portrait of Shinran, and further to the right is a scroll that was created, or of the type that was created at least, by the Japanese Buddhist monk Nichiren, and it reads Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, which is to honor the Lotus Sutra. So over on the right-hand side, I think the far right, I don't know if you can tell, but that's a photo of Samantabhadra riding his white elephant. He is the Bodhisattva Universal Virtue, and there's a whole chapter about him, a whole sutra about him, actually, in the Threefold Lotus Sutra. The third of the 3 sutras is about him and the fact that he looks after people who look after the Lotus Sutra. And that, by the way, is simply a photograph that I cut out of a book. A lot of my art, so-called, is basically made up of photographs that I've cut out of books and then had framed. Over to the left of that is a beautiful sort of a painting of Kuan Yin. And, I think Kuan Yin certainly, or Guan Yin, or Guanxi Yin, I think in Chinese, is certainly one of the most revered of what I call the cosmic bodhisattvas. He was first identified in the Lotus Sutra, but later evolved from a male to a female form in China, actually. And his/her name means regarder of the cries of the world. So this is a bodhisattva who is really an emanation from Amitabha, who can be more accessible to us ordinary beings. Up there above that Kuan Yin statue, it says, "It is not enough to be compassionate, you must act." And that is a quote from the Dalai Lama. To the left of that is interesting photographs of, I have to say, these were probably taken from China, no doubt. And it's a portrayal of Amida Buddha and his entourage. And this actual stone carving is in the Freer Gallery in Washington, D.C., and I had the good fortune to spend a good bit of time there studying it and taking pictures of it. Let me see, what else do I want to say? If you go about the middle, you can see there toward the top, in the middle of this photo, an example of the so-called Rego type paintings. This is where we see Amida Buddha with Kuan Yin and Mahasamaprampta, the other bodhisattva that flanks Kuan Yin and represents wisdom. They're coming down to greet the dying person and to be prepared to whisk him or her away to rebirth in the Pure Land. Let me see. I just want to go now to the other photograph, and I'll note that what you see in that photo, aside from a number of my books, over to the left, the tall Kuan Yin statue, I want to bring out this point that this statue was actually part of the China exhibit at the World's Fair in Knoxville, Tennessee, in America. Back, I can't tell you the exact date. It was sometime, I believe, in the 80s. But I actually visited that World's Fair, and at the end of the fair, they sold some of the items, and I was able to acquire that particular statue, which is a kind of lacquer. It's very lightweight, and it's just beautiful and very elegant. By the way, over to the right, you see that white elephant, which to me, sort of symbolizes Samantabhadra's mount. But just beyond that, you see the statue of two Buddhas. This is from chapter 11 in the Lotus Sutra, where a Buddha abundant treasures comes up out of the ground in this great stupa, even though he supposedly was long deceased. And he tells the assembly that he presents himself any place where the Lotus Sutra is being preached. And as part of the narrative in this story, he at some point invites Shakyamuni Buddha up to sit with him up in the top of this marvelous stupa. And over to the left, there are a couple of the patriarchs within Pure Land Buddhism, one of whom I believe is Shantao. So I hope that you enjoy some of that. Let me just point out one other thing. You see some blue stones on the bookshelves, and I want to make the point that those are actually lapis lazuli. And when you read the Pure Land Sutras, or some of the other sutras, you'll see that the earth in the Pure Land is described at times as being made up of lapis lazuli, and lapis is also one of the 7 precious things, along with gold, silver, beryl, and a couple 3 others. But anyhow, I was able to get some of that lapis at a gem show in a nearby town, and that has a lot of symbolic meaning for me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.